I'm Kelly Jennings, CEO of PowerBand Solutions. PowerBand is a cloud-based provider of auction, inventory, and finance solutions that make buying, selling, and financing vehicles more efficient. PowerBand Solutions trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol PBX and on the OTCQB symbol PWWPF and on Frankfurt symbol 1ZV. For more information, please visit us at powerbandsolutions.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is investigative reporter Spencer Fernando. You can find his articles at SpencerFernando.com. Welcome back to the show, Spencer.
Good to be here.
Spencer, the mainstream media in Canada got a nearly $500 million, more than a $500 million gift, $595 million from the federal government to keep them from downsizing their newsrooms anymore. First of all, is that money actually going to do that, or will market forces continue to work on things like the big newspapers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might buy them a little bit of time, but I think the real thing the government is trying to do is to buy their support, really. And it's interesting because even before they get the money, it already starts to change the calculus. I mean, if you have any understanding of, human nature, once people in the media start to feel that they're totally dependent on the government for their survival financially, then they're going to be nicer to that government. And they know the Conservatives are not going to give them a bailout, so they want to keep the Liberals in power. And I think it's kind of a behavioral change that the Liberals are trying to do with that. And the media is already pretty left-wing biased much of the time, so they're trying to lock that in and make it even stronger, I think.
Have you seen any examples of that yet?
Well, if you look at how they're even reporting on it, I mean, there's not too much criticism. I mean, a few opinion writers have been critical of it, but most of the news organizations are either supportive of it or are reporting on it in a way that doesn't even include the possibility that it could influence them. So I think already you can see that they're, and they were very critical when the Conservatives were calling it a media bailout. They were very critical of the Conservatives. So basically using liberal type messaging to attack the Conservatives because the Conservatives were criticizing the idea of a media bailout. So I think it's already started.
Well, isn't it the opposition's job to be critical of government programs?
You'd think so, and the media is supposed to be also holding the government accountable, but that often doesn't seem to be the case when the Liberals are in power.
Do we know how and why this money, or how this money is going to be distributed? Who does it go to?
Well, the Liberals say they're going to have basically a committee. They say it'll be independent. Of course, it'll be appointed by the federal government. That will look at who they view as worthy of getting the funds and then give the funds to those organizations. But the thing is, I mean, that's what governments always do. You create a technically independent committee and then you pick the members of the committee and you pick people who are going to do exactly what you want in the first place. And so I don't think we're going to see any media that's really critical of the Trudeau government getting much money. It's just going to go to the establishment media. And the big irony is that a lot of these newspapers are in fact owned by either very rich people or very rich corporations. So it's very strange that we're bailing out groups that often have a lot of funding behind them.
Well, yes, the Thompson family, for example, the richest family in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure why they would need more money. Not from the government, at least. And
also, too, with some of the television companies, maybe their newsrooms lose money. And don't forget, television news started as a public service. They knew it was going to be a money loser when they first started television news. Then newsrooms started to make money, and corporations expected their evening news to make money. And if they started to lose money now, they cut the staff. And another thing that's happened too, Chorus, for example, has killed the local cable companies in Vancouver, I think in Saskatoon as well, maybe Calgary. And they promised they would do more local news out of their newsrooms, but right after that move that saved them $10 to $20 million, they laid off massive amounts of people from those very newsrooms. So, they didn't carry up to their, they call it promise of performance when you get a broadcast license in Canada. And right away, they went on and laid off people anyway, and I haven't seen any improvement in local news coverage at all.
No, I mean, that's the thing. Like, you can't trust the promises they're going to make. And the other thing is, I mean, technology changes. It's, the news used to have a monopoly. They were the ones with the cameras. They were the ones with the power to reach a lot of people very quickly. And now, basically, everyone has a camera in their pocket. Anyone who has social media can reach tons of people quickly. So there's still certainly, I think, room for the news, but it's just a different market now. The world has changed, and again, I just don't think you can trust the government to be deciding what's real news and what's not, and who should get money and who shouldn't.
Well, also, is it really news when they spend so much time now in the local news showing you video from around the world of polar bears playing with tires or seals swimming with dogs and that kind of thing? How is that covering my local news?
Well, yeah, and the amount of coverage of Trump, on Canadian networks, often you flip to CNN, you flip to Fox, and you go to CBC, and they're all covering the exact same story. Maybe from different perspectives, but it's like, if you want to watch American news, I mean, there's loads of American news channels, and most Canadians have access to them. So why is Canadian news spending so much time talking about what's happening in the U.S.? If it's a story that directly relates to Canada, sure, but in many cases, they're just covering a totally U.S.-only political story. So why should we be paying for that?
Yeah, and another example here in BC of how perhaps news coverage is bought and paid for or non-coverage. BC Hydro spends millions on local ads, and I notice the stations they spend the most money on are the least critical of the government utility.
What a coincidence.
Yes. Do you have the same thing happen in Manitoba?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the newspapers here are in large part dependent on provincial government, in this case, advertising. So, I mean, the thing is, it's always tough to pinpoint. You can't say, like, oh, here's an obvious example of the government writing a story. But if you understand human nature, it's impossible for people to not be somewhat influenced when their money is dependent on, the government giving them money. You're not gonna be as harsh towards the government if you depend on that government for money.
Well, another example I could see here with BC Hydro and non-coverage is Sharon Noble from the BC Coalition to Stop Smart Meters came out with a 700 page report about smart meter fires, and there wasn't one word about it in the mainstream media in British Columbia. And you wonder, like, who's being paid not to carry the story?
Yeah, well, it's a chilling effect, right? And the government can say, oh, we didn't order anybody to do anything, or BC Hydro can say, oh, we never gave any orders not to cover a story, but people are not going to attack a group that is their main source of money.
Well, another example of that would be the Mars water bomber, one of the largest aerial attack bombers in the world for fires. And I found out that forestry workers were told they'd be fired if they said they needed the Mars water bomber, which the government hasn't used for years, even though they've had record forest fires here. So you can see, the chilling account where officially there's no comment, but what's behind the no comment?
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I think in democracies people try to get away with controlling the narrative. They say, oh, there's no overt, obvious influence here. People are free to do what they want. But in practical terms, they're still really controlling what's happening.
We'll have more with Spencer Fernando right after this.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Grand Portage Resources recently completed the 2018 drill program on its 100% controlled Herbert Gold Discovery property located in the prolific Juneau Belt in southeast Alaska. Drill results are expected through late 2018. Past drill results included numerous multi-ounce gold assays on multiple veins. Grand Portage trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTCQB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Spencer Fernando. Spencer, via rail, has announced that it's going to spend $989 million on 32 new trains. However, it won't be going to the Canadian government-subsidized Bombardier. It'll be going instead to a German company. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, well, they were both competing for the contract. Siemens AG in Germany ended up winning it. And I think people would be surprised that the federal government didn't order Via Rail to use Bombardier, but apparently they can't because of international trade agreements. So, Bombardier's been losing a few contracts lately. Their stock has been not doing too well. And the Quebec government has already started talking about possibly another bailout for them. So it seems like the same old, same old. Their executives seem to be bad at everything except getting bailed out and giving themselves bonuses. I'm not really sure how any of them still have jobs.
Spencer, are people in Canada turning away from the mainstream media?
I'd say to an extent. I think that's a big part of why the government's trying to bail them out right there. They want to control the narrative through the mainstream media, and the more people go to other sources, the less they feel they have control. So, and I think the other part is technology. Again, as I said before, it's the media doesn't have the same monopoly on reaching people all at once and on having cameras and people everywhere reporting on things. So, I don't know. I think part of it is also the bias. I mean, it's become pretty obvious that there's a pretty strong left-wing liberal bias in much of the media, and I think people are starting to see that more and more.
By signing on to the Global Compact on Migration, have Canadian laws been broken, and could a new Prime Minister make the Global Compact on Migration null and void?
Well, I think the government would probably get away with saying no laws have been broken because they'll keep saying it's a non-binding agreement. But the problem with that is that the agreement, it's supposed to be a framework for laws within individual countries, right? So as they say, well, you sign this and then you implement it through laws in your own country. So I think what they're going to do is it's an interesting kind of hypocrisy they have. They say, oh, this agreement's super important. The world needs it. Migration, a big problem, needs to be dealt with through international institutions, give away our sovereignty. And then they say, oh, but don't worry, it's non-binding. And you can't really have it both ways. You can't say, oh, it's super needed for the world, and then, oh, it's non-binding, don't worry about it. So I think it's very concerning, and I think they'll get away with saying there's no laws broken because they'll keep repeating, oh, it's non-binding. But I think when you really look at what's in it and what impact it's going to have on Canada, it's a very serious problem.
What kind of things could it force Canada to do? We already have a Prime Minister that plans to boost immigration dramatically more than a poll of Canadians said that they wanted to see.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the biggest problems is that it doesn't make any distinction really between illegal and legal immigration. It just calls it's migration, right? So they would consider people coming into Canada from the United States illegally. Oh, that's just migration. And then they say countries have to suppress media that's against migration. They call anti-migration speech hate speech. So it gets to the point where being against illegal immigration is hate speech and should be suppressed. But if you can't stop illegal immigration, then you don't really have a border at all. So you don't have a border, you can't speak against illegal immigration, and then these decisions are being made by politicians at a supranational institution, right? It's not even a national government deciding. So, I mean, it breaks down borders, kind of removes the whole idea of sovereignty of individual countries. And it's just another step towards centralizing control in the United Nations instead of in countries.
What is the Yellow Vest movement, and is it growing in Canada?
It's a movement in France where I think it represents a lot of working class people who've really been, first of all, it was the increase in the carbon tax there. And then it kind of grew even beyond that to overall anger at Macron who is seen as, cutting taxes for the elites but raising them on everybody else. His leadership style is seen as very out of touch, and he's not popular at all, and there's a lot of people struggling there, and it's seen that he doesn't really care about the struggles of the actual people he's supposed to represent. He just cares about, looking good for the international press, getting on TV, saying all the politically correct things. And in terms of whether it's growing in Canada, it seems like I am seeing people on Twitter start talking about that we should start our own movement here in Canada. We'll see if it grows or not, but there's definitely people paying attention to it. But I think it's part of a broader issue. I mean, in Canada, we're supposed to be damaging our own economy for the carbon tax so we can save the world from climate change, is what Trudeau and McKenna say. But the country that hosted the Paris Accord had to back down on raising their own carbon tax. So if even France can't do it, and they can't convince people to accept it, and people are realizing how damaging the carbon tax is there, then why should Canadians be going through with it? It makes no sense at all.
Well, there's been an interesting suggestion from Stuart Muir from the Resource Works Society. If Canada really wants to help the global situation with carbon emissions, then we should export as much LNG as we can to Europe and Asia so that they can lower their carbon footprint, because right now so many of those areas are really reliant on coal. And so by exporting more LNG, we're actually reducing the world's carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There's been such linear thinking in all of this, where the government just tells us, oh, less Canadian emissions equals good for the world. And you know what also bothers me is you see reports in the news and by different groups, and they say, oh, Canada is among the highest per capita emissions. And then they just leave it there. They don't say anything else. Yeah, but Canada is also one of the only countries that is this cold.
We are the coldest country.
Yeah, so you've got 30-something million, 35 million people, or 37 now or so, 30-something million people living in an extremely cold country. That's not only cold, but it's very distant. I mean, one city is very far from the other. Cities are spread out. So lots of people are going to need to drive. We're a first world country, which means we already have high energy use, and we have tons of resources. So people just don't even go into that.
Also, Spencer, the whole idea of a carbon tax really seems to be splitting Canada, where some provinces have a carbon tax. BC's had it for over a decade. And by the way, it hasn't reduced carbon use at all. And, and then the rest of the provinces who are going to fight this tooth and nail. Is this a divisive issue that could perhaps topple the federal government?
Yeah, it's very divisive. I think it's certainly going to be one of the key issues in the next federal campaign. But, even the overall approach of the Trudeau government and some of the provinces, Quebec and BC, those governments, it's causing a lot of division in the country. I mean, separatist sentiment in Alberta is rising. You're seeing a lot more articles about that. There are growing calls in Alberta for a boycott of Quebec products. The Quebec premier said there's no social acceptability for pipelines in Quebec, but he and the Quebec government keep cashing the equalization checks that are paid for mostly by Alberta and somewhat by BC as well. So I think you're seeing certainly alienation in Alberta starting to rise. And, you have to think, how long are Albertans really going to be willing to put up with a situation where even when they're struggling, they get tons of their money taken away and given to other provinces? And the very thing that enables them to succeed economically is being blocked by the federal government and blocked by other provinces.
Do you think Ottawa could have used the notwithstanding legislation to just push the pipeline through to the West Coast?
Sure. I mean, the thing is, you think, let's do a hypothetical scenario. Say there was a big world war and Canada needed tons of oil right away. Does anyone really think that they wouldn't be able to get a big pipeline finished in 1 or 2 weeks, even under current laws? I mean, the government has laws in place where they get to declare something's in the national interest, and they can build things very quickly. The Trudeau government just hasn't been willing to implement it. So I think the reason so many people in Alberta are upset is that Trudeau keeps acting like, oh yeah, I'm trying to do something, but he never actually does anything. And all he does is actually implement regulations that make it tougher to get pipelines approved. and the carbon tax, which pushes investment out of the country. So, again, how much longer will people in Alberta be willing to put up with this situation?
We'll have more with Spencer Fernando right after this.
Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp, MGI and the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected several high-grade gold intersections, including 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. Additional drill targets on the LH property have been identified by a 2018 drone airborne magnetic survey to further evaluate a pyrrhotite-enriched gold-bearing system. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Spencer Fernando. Spencer, what's your view on this Huawei executive being held by Canada on the request of the U.S. in relation to their sanctions against Iran?
Yeah, well, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Huawei was violating the sanctions. I don't think China really feels that they're beholden to U.S. laws. I mean, they've sure taken a lot of U.S. intellectual property, so they're not too worried about that. The question will be whether, I mean, Trump just today said he's willing to intervene in that case if it means striking a trade deal. The problem with that is that's going to undermine the justification the Canadian government used to arrest her in the first place. And the U.S. had said that this had nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with trade deals. They were totally separate issues. So Trump has now linked them together, and her lawyers will now be able to go and say, well, look, see, this is a political issue. This is a trade issue. She wasn't really arrested for a good reason, is what they'll say. Let her go. So, it's going to be interesting. One thing I think a lot of Canadians would be surprised is that she's the daughter of the guy who founded Huawei, and he's a former information officer in the Chinese People's Liberation Army, an army with an interesting history of numerous war crimes. And she has two homes in Vancouver. She's not even a Canadian citizen, but she has two homes in Vancouver. So I think there's going to be people, beyond all of this, people wondering, why are so many, people who are not even Canadian citizens even allowed to buy a property in Canada? I mean, New Zealand is saying no to that. They've had a big problem with people really messing up the housing market. And so I think Canada needs to start asking those same questions as well and start looking at putting some restrictions in place. I mean, our cities should be livable and affordable for our own citizens, not for billionaires from other countries who they're not even getting Canadian citizenship.
And are they paying Canadian taxes?
Yeah, I mean, I doubt it. I mean, in her case, I'm sure paying some Canadian taxes wouldn't be a big deal if it's property taxes, perhaps, but they're obviously not paying most other taxes because they're not citizens, so they're not going to be taxed in the same way. And it's just, they're just buying up parts of Vancouver, parts of Canada. And, again, it's making a lot of cities tougher to live in for Canadian citizens because people can't afford it. And when you have people who are not citizens starting to drive out actual citizens, that can be a bit of a concern if you're letting the market be manipulated so badly.
What is the case about this armed forces captain where the government has refused to pay for her prosthetic leg, even though she's still on active duty and goes into combat zones?
Yeah, so there was a report today, Kimberly Fawcett. She still serves in the armed forces, or the Canadian military overall, Air Force captain. And she, when she was in the country, but still under active duty, her and her husband both served, so they had to make arrangements for their 9-month-old son, because they could both be called to duty at any moment, and you have to deploy right away, so they need a backup plan. So she was working on that, and she was driving with her son, got into a crash into the median. She grabbed her son out of the car because didn't want to be hit by oncoming traffic, dived into a ditch, and then a truck hit a semi, deflected into the ditch, hit her. Her leg was torn off, and her son was thrown under a semi-truck and was killed. And so the government has continuously refused, and under both the previous government and this one, have refused to pay for her $34,000 prosthetic leg, so she has to pay for it herself. She's even redeployed, even with the prosthetic leg, redeployed to Afghanistan. And just really not receiving any help at all. The government has argued, and Veterans Affairs has said, oh, well, she wasn't technically on active duty when she was injured, even though generals have said she was on active duty. They're just debating all these semantics, when what they should have just done is just pay for it. I mean, she's still serving. It wouldn't have happened in the first place if she hadn't been serving, because she wouldn't have had to make arrangements like that. So it's obviously because, it's something that happened while she was serving the country. And it's $34,000. So I wrote about it, and then I discussed, and she even had discussed the contrast between Omar Khadr. She said they bent over backward to be nice to Omar Khadr, to do the right thing even though it wasn't popular. And then I kind of think, well, I didn't murder anybody. I didn't go against my country. I simply served. So why am I being singled out? And then I point out that really, we have civilian control of the military in this country. So all the government has to do, the minister has to call up and say, you have to pay for this. It's really that simple. Just one phone call. So yeah, the fact that the government would really, they do so much to give Omar Khadr a bunch of money. And then someone who's still serving the country, they can't just give her $34,000. And that's just crazy.
Well, also, doesn't Canada have a shortage of military personnel right now? People don't want to sign up?
Oh yeah, terrible shortage. They're having serious problems. And when you read this, who can blame anybody? First of all, you get sent over, and the equipment you're using is generally second or even third rate. Definitely not the best, because the government keeps buying the cheapest stuff they can get. They buy used leftovers that other countries don't want, and then they give that to people serving. And then if you get injured, they break all their promises to you, and you're left on your own. So what's the incentive for someone to serve? You can't expect people to serve in the military in large numbers if there's not some sort of benefit for them.
Have not both the Harper and Trudeau governments left literally billions of dollars on the shelf that they promised would go to veterans?
Yeah, they both did a pretty bad job. I think it's one area where the whole political class has been pretty awful. I did hear some good things. Veterans have said that under Aaron O'Toole, who himself served, that things were starting to improve, but he was not in that job too long, and the Conservatives were defeated. Trudeau made a bunch of promises, broke most of them. And then the Veterans Affairs Minister, the current one, attacked a veteran who was criticizing the Liberals for breaking a promise. And then it turned out the veteran was telling the truth. So he attacked, and hasn't even apologized. Hasn't apologized for attacking someone who was telling the truth. And then the O'Regan, the Veterans Affairs Minister, he was just at an event, and he said, leaving journalism was a tough, big change in my life. And so I can relate. I can understand the feelings of people who leave the military. So to just compare those things is just crazy. They seem totally out of touch. And yeah, it's just another government that's failing miserably to actually not only increase funding for veterans, but to even spend the money that's there in the first place.
Yeah, they can't say there's a shortage of money because, like I said, we've had two successive governments promise a lot of money. It's in the budget, and then they don't spend it.
Mm-hmm. And, you can't say, veterans are asking for too much, and then they keep announcing, like with Trudeau announcing to Trevor Noah $50 million for foreign countries. Look, if you don't have the money for veterans, then you don't have it for anything else, right? But they keep making all these other big spending announcements. So it's just, I don't know how the country got to the point where the priorities are so messed up, but something's seriously wrong.
Spencer, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Good talking to you.
My guest has been investigative reporter Spencer Fernando. You can find his articles at spencerfernando.com. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. If you have any questions for the show or our guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.